Hey guys, this is Carrie, and in this video we're going to continue our circle game by adding food to the screen. So right now where my game is at, and you might be having the same problem, when I use my arrow keys it scrolls kind of my window around. So what you can do to avoid this is you can zoom out on the game by doing Control minus or Command minus, depending on the type of computer you have. And then, one more time. Okay, and you can do that a couple of times to zoom out, and now my game fits on my screen. And so what we've got right now is we've got a game with a working player character, but it's time to add some collectibles as well as a score to our game. So I'm going to start off by adding some food information. And I'm going to do that in the section of my code that's in between all the player stuff and the game loop at the bottom. So I'm just adding a comment here saying food section. So I'm going to take the same idea that I used for the player, which is that I stored all the player information in a list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to store all my food information in a list as well. So thinking about the structure, my foods aren't going to move. So I'm not going to put any speeds for my food, but I am going to give my foods an X and Y coordinate each. So I'm going to start off by making, just a couple of food items. So I'm going to say let food 1, and of course my computer is lagging here. Okay, let food 1 equal. And I'll put a food in the center of the screen. So 400, 300 will be the center. But I think that's also where my player starts, so maybe that's not the best pick. Maybe I'll do 400, 100. So these will be my X and Y coordinates for that food. I'm also going to make another food item all the way down here. That will be maybe 600 for the X coordinate, 500 for the Y coordinate. You'll remember that as the Y coordinate goes up, so here was Y equals 100, Y equals 500 will be down here, which is a little bit strange on the computer. Okay, so I've got my two food examples. Maybe I'll make a note for myself for food items, for foods, for food, comma. The list is X coordinate, then Y coordinate. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to be able to draw my food items. So I'm going to define a function, and I'm going to call it draw food. And when I draw a food item, I'll need to take in some food info, which will be one of my lists. And the reason why is I have to be able to draw this food and also draw this food. So to draw my food, what I'm thinking is I'll use a circle, just like I had for the player. So I'm going to scroll up here to get my circle, and I'm going to use the yellow one because the yellow one was positioned at the player's X and Y coordinates. Actually, you know what? I'm going to copy and paste all the way up through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the X and Y coordinates not from the player info when I draw the food, but I'm going to get them from the food info. I'm going to say let X equal the 0th coordinate from the food info, so 400 in this case, or 600 in this case. Y will be the other coordinate, the 1th coordinate, 0, 1, the 1th coordinate from the list. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my food graphics, and I'm just going to use a simple circle for my food. I'll make it red, like an apple. I'm going to begin a path. I'm going to draw a circle at those X and Y coordinates. I want the radius to be a little bit smaller than my guy, because apple should be tinier than his head, so maybe I'll go with 30 and see how that looks. And then I'll go from 0 to 2 pi. All right, I think I've got it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to momentarily comment out the game loop right here. Because if I leave that game loop running and I draw my food once, it's going to immediately erase it by drawing this green background over it. So let me try out drawing my two foods and see what that looks like. I'll do draw food on food 1. So I'm calling the function that I just wrote, as well as draw. And I think I might have a parenthesis problem somewhere because I noticed that when I press enter, it's indenting me. So let's see if that happens. And I'm going to use draw food on food 2. All right, so let me refresh it. And I've got my 2 food items being drawn. So that looks great. All right, this does feel a little bit clumsy though, because I might want to have more than 2 food items. Like maybe I want to have 5 foods. And if I keep running draw food, food 1, draw food, food 2, draw food, food 3, draw food, food 4, that repetitiveness doesn't feel like good programming to me. So what I'm thinking next is I'm thinking I could upgrade my food function by writing a function called draw all foods. So what I'm going to do is, instead of treating my foods as, oh sorry, and I'll just write the basic structure for my function here, just so that doesn't cause any indentation errors or things like that. But I'm thinking that my way of storing foods might need to upgrade before I write this function. Instead of storing these food items separately, maybe I could make a list of foods that will contain all of my food items. And the benefit of doing this list of foods is that no matter how many food items I put inside of the list, I can use a for each loop to do the same thing for each of them. And that feels like a much more powerful way to work with the food items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put food 1 inside of the list, and I'm going to put food 2 inside of the list. I'm also going to get rid of these draw food functions down here. All right, so when I draw all foods, instead of taking the individual foods, I'm going to take the whole list of foods that contains all of them. So I'll type that in parentheses here. And then basically what I want to do is I want to go through that list, and for each of them, and here's where we get those double parentheses, for each food, use an arrow function. And what I want to do for each food is I want to apply the draw food function to each of them. All right, so let's see. I am going to just refresh it here so that it gets rid of what I had before. And now that I've written this draw all foods function, I'm going to run the draw all foods function on my foods list. And that should apply the draw food function to each food inside of that list. Let's see if it works. Okay, it's working. All right, so I think I'm ready to bring my game loop back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete draw all foods from here. Oop, let me comment that part out again. Create a game loop is a comment for me to read, not for the computer. It's not code. So what I want to do is I want to, let's see, draw the background, update the player, draw the player. I also want to draw the foods. Draw all foods. And I want to apply that to the foods list. And I want to do that every time through the list. So what will happen now is it should draw the green background, update my player based on the direction that's moving, draw the player at its current position, and then draw all of the foods from this list. All right, so it's looking pretty good. The only thing that's left today, I think, is to make my foods edible. I need to be able to eat these and improve my scores. So in order to do that, I'm thinking that another function that could be useful, when I eat the food, I'm going to need to create a new food item in a random spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my foods group, and I'm going to say function, create food. And you can see that my approach to programming is pretty different than it used to be. Now whenever I want to do something, I think of it as a smaller task. Drawing food was a small task, so I wrote a function for it. Creating food is a small task, so I write a function for it. All right, so when I create food, what I want to do is I want to make an X and Y coordinate somewhere on the grid, and then I want to store that information in this list here, foods. So making a random coordinate is something we've done before. I'm going to see if I've done it in this program. I haven't. So I'm going to go over to my toolbox. I'm going to grab the entire generate random function, and notice that I include the parenthesis at the bottom. People still are forgetting to do that, so please don't forget that. That will be a common mistake. And we're going to put that at the top of our page here so that we can generate random numbers throughout our code. Down here, I'm going to say when I create food, I want to make an X value that should be a random number. And that random number should go from 0 to the maximum possible x coordinate, which for me is 800. I also want to make a random y coordinate, which will be generate random 0, which is all the way at the top, down to 600, which was my height of my canvas at the bottom. Next up, I'm going to say let new food equal. It's going to be this list of x and y coordinates right here. And I want to add new food to the foods list, because once I add it to the foods list, then here, whenever I draw all foods, it's going to draw that food. But in order to add it to this list, I have to remember my list functions from like the shopping list command line app, where we worked with appending, removing, and inserting items into list. So I'm going to go to my toolbox, and there's a part of these array functions, these list functions, that we might have sidestepped over. In order to use these, it looks like, according to the toolbox, I have to put this line of HTML above my regular JavaScript line. So I'm going to copy and paste just line 84 from the toolbox. I'm going to go to my HTML, and I'm going to put this right above my script.js line. And now I can just use those append and remove functions like I normally would. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say take the foods list and append to that list. Oh no, that's not the way append works. I'm thinking of a different function. Append to the foods list new food. Okay, so to check to see if my foods list or my create food function is working, I'm going to delete these two foods that I started with. I'm going to empty out the list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say make the foods list and then run the create food function 3 times. So I'll just copy and paste that 3 times. And I should have 3 random foods created and appended to this list. All right, sick. And every time I refresh it, my foods start off in different places. And because of the way we coded this, no matter where they start, it will draw all the foods in the proper locations. Last function for today is going to be, I think it's the last function for today, is going to be the update food list, or the update food function. And I'm going to change this to update all foods to be really clear. So when I update all the foods, it's going to need to take in information about the foods. But what I want to do with updating foods is a little bit different than my update player function. So when I updated the player moved. But my foods aren't going to be moving. Instead, when I think about updating all of my foods, I'm really going to be thinking about the fact that I have to see if I'm eating the food. So the only update that's going to happen to the food is going to be whether I'm eating it or not. So I'm actually going to also have to take in the player info here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think, okay, what's the condition that would mean I eat the food? And the condition that would mean I eat the food is if my distance between my center and the food center is less than a certain amount, it'll be like I'm overlapping it. So we've written this function in the function problems problem set, but I'm also going to write this function here. And I don't think of it as just a food function, so I'm going to put this function at the top next to my generate random function, because it will also be useful when we do our bad guys list. So function get distance. And this is going to be a way of finding the distance between any original point with x and y coordinates, x1, y1, and any secondary point, x2, y2. And basically, what that will do is it will be let distance equal, and then here you can look up the distance formula. I'm dumb. Okay, distance formula, and you can type this in JavaScript. So math dot square root, and then in parentheses, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And this is an example of a function where I'm going to compute the distance, but then I'm going to want to use it somewhere else. So I need to output this distance. So similar to how we generate a random number and then we output it here, I'm going to return this distance that I computed in this line so I can use it in another location. All right, so now that I've got my getDistance function working, just confirming x2, x1, y2 minus y1. Okay, cool, looks good. I'm going to use that function down here. So when I update all the foods, what I want to do is I want to go through each of the foods. So I'm going to say take the foods list, and for each of them, take the food that I'm currently up to and do this. Okay, to make my program more efficient, I don't think I need to find the player info coordinates every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the player coordinates here. So I'm going to say let player x equal, go to the player info list, which was that list of like x, y, player's x speed, and the player's y speed. Take the 0th thing for their x coordinate. Let player y's coordinate be player info. That will be the thing from the first position in that list. So I'm going to do that before I get into this list. I'm also going to say inside of the list, because inside of the loop, the for each loop, each food is going to have different x and y values. So I'll have to put this part inside. Let food x equal the current food 0th position, because every food in the 0th position has its x value. Let food y equal the current food 1th position. And then what I'm going to do is I want to let distance equal, use that getDistance function with the player x, player y as my x1 and y1 coordinates, and my food x and food y as my y1 or x1, x2 and y2 coordinates. Now that I've got the distance, I want to say if that distance between me and the food, like right now, is less than a certain amount, then we'll do something. So in order to get the amount that I want to use, I can be a little bit mathematical here. The radius of my food was 30. And the radius of my player was about 50. So if the distance between them is less than something like maybe 70, I'm doing a little less than the combined radius, I think that will do what I want. So what I want to do right now is I'm just going to use the console, and I'm just going to console.log yum when I get there, because that will tell me if kind of this trigger is working the way I want it to work. So let me expand this out a little bit. I'll open up my JavaScript console, and you should do the same. And so I'm going to refresh my screen. Okay, let's see. Oh, I see I'm still logging the key presses, so I'm going to get rid of that because I don't need that anymore. So console.log event.key, I'm going to comment that out. All right, I still have that guest letter thing there. I don't know why. Okay, let me refresh it again. Okay, cool. So now I'm no longer logging those. And as I move, it's not logging anything, which is great. But if I get close enough to the food, nothing happens. I made a mistake. I never called my function. So as part of my game loop, after updating the player info, I want to run my update all foods function every time through the game loop. And what that's going to do is every time through the game loop, it's going to check the distances to see if it's time to eat the food. So update all foods. I'm going to plug in the foods list first, and then the player info, because these are my parameters. All right, let's see if it works now. So nothing's happening, which is good, because I'm not supposed to be eating my food yet. And then when I get close to the food, yum, 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 yum. Awesome. Yum, 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 yum. Okay, and the radius seems like a good radius. Okay, cool. So I can see that my distance formula is working as I expected to. I just need to program in what it actually means to eat the food. So I'll leave a comment here. And I think what it means to eat the food is I want to take that food item out from the list, and I want to create a new food item, and then I want to update my score. So remove the current food item, add a new food item, update the score. All right, so that's my last to-do list, I think, for today in terms of completing the food. So remove the current food item. Well, the way our remove function works is it removes something at the position. So like we could say remove the second item in a list and it would go 0, 1, 2, and then remove that one. So I need to kind of keep track of which food item I'm up to. So I'm going to make a variable here, and I'm going to say let current food equal 0, because I'm at the 0th food to start. And then every time through this for each loop, at the very end of it, here, I'm going to say current food should equal the old value of current food plus 1. And what that will do is it will say, okay, check everything for the 0th food item, and then add 1. Check everything for the first food item. And by keeping track of what food I'm up to, I can say if the distance between me and that food item is less than 70, then remove from foods current food. All right, so I'm going to check to see if that part works. So now what should happen is it should actually get rid of the food and say yum. Oh, sick, it works. All right, let me eat these two foods too. Okay, I got one of them, and I got the other. All right, but it's not very much fun if I can eat all the food. So that's where we get to the next part, which is we want to add a new food item. And here we're really lucky because we already wrote the function. To add a new food item, all we want to do is create food. So remove the current food, create a new food, and update the score. All right, let me test it first before I update the score. It's always a good idea. All right, so you can see that as I eat the food, it catapults it to a new location. And really what's happening is it's just creating a new food item in a new location. All right, it's working pretty well. Last thing is the score. So for the score, I'm going to need to create a score variable at the very top of the page. I'll do that right below the player info. Let score start off at 0. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that when I eat the food, my score should equal the old score plus 100. So 100 points for each food. And now instead of doing console.log yum, I'm going to do console.log score just to make sure that that's working. So I'll refresh it a couple times. So I should see, oh, it's yum still. Okay, refresh it a couple more times. 100. Let's just see if it goes to 200. Okay, sick, it does. All right, so the score is working. I just need to display it. So I'm going to write a function to display my score. Function, display score, and that's going to take in the score variable, which will be my current score. Now, we've never displayed text on the canvas before, so I'm going to have to look it up, HTML, text, canvas, or JavaScript, I don't know, I'm just throwing all the languages out there. HTML canvas text. All right, I think this is going to be the one. All right, this looks good. So to write the text on my page, I am going to do this. I already have my canvas and context selected and stored in variables, so I don't need that. So I'm going to say when I display the score, set the font to this as a rough draft, and then I want the text to say score equals, or score, and then I want to add to that the current score. So it'll be like score dot dot 100. I don't know what this 10 and 50 are, so let me see if I can figure that out here. These are the coordinates where it's going to display it. So I'm thinking to display it 10 and 50 might be right. Let me try those out. So I'll try 10 and 50 there. And let me take a look at my game. Oh wait, no, I have to add this here. So I want to display the score every time through the loop. Otherwise the score will get erased. So let me call that function at the very end here. And I'm going to make sure to insert the score as the variable into the parameter. All right, so I have the score there. I think I can change the color. Let me just see how it looks as I'm getting more points. I can move it up a little bit. So 50 seems a bit high. I'm going to put it at 40. I'm also going to change the color by doing ctx.fill style, similar to when we make a shape. And I'm going to make it equal to black so that the text is black. All right, so I think that looks pretty spot on for how I want it to look. I could make it a little bit smaller, but that looks pretty good. All right, so let's see. I think everything's done with the food. We're making random food. Every time we eat a food, it deletes it and puts it in a new spot. It raises our score. I think all that's left is the bad guys. So that will be our next video, guys. And we've got a nice function, or nice like functional build to our game here. So see you in class. Bye.